Story 1: The Forklift Driver. You know that sound a forklift makes when it backs up? That shrill, rhythmic beeping meant to warn you it's moving? I used to just find it annoying, especially at 3 in the morning. Now, whenever I hear it, even if it's just a delivery truck outside my apartment during the day, my blood turns to ice. Because I know what was driving that machine in the dark, and it definitely wasn't human. My name is Mark, and about 6 months ago, desperately needing cash, I took a graveyard shift at a massive distribution center just outside of Columbus. It was one of those endless, cavernous concrete boxes filled with towering metal shelves that seemed to go on forever. The pay was decent because nobody wanted the hours, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most nights it was just me and maybe 2 other guys, Jason and an older, quiet guy named Sal, spread out over 200,000 square feet. You could easily go an entire shift without seeing another soul. The only company I had was the hum of the high bay fluorescent lights and the whine of my own electric forklift. It was lonely, boring work, but it paid the bills. At first, the job was just mindless, but about 3 weeks in, things started getting weird. I was assigned to Sector G, the oldest part of the warehouse. The lighting there was spotty at best, leaving huge patches of deep shadow between the aisles. I was pulling a pallet of heavy detergent bottles when I heard it. Beep, beep, beep. It was distinct, another forklift backing up. It sounded close, maybe 2 aisles over. I paused, letting my machine idle. Jason was on his lunch break, and I knew Sal was way over in receiving on the other side of the building. I grabbed the radio clipped to my vest. Yo, Jason, Sal, you guys down in G? Just static. I figured maybe maintenance was around and didn't radio in. I drove to the end of my aisle and peered around the corner into the next one. It was completely empty, just dust motes floating under a flickering yellow bulb. I told myself it was an echo. Warehouses are weird like that. But when I turned back to my own machine, my stomach dropped. A pallet on the very top rack about 40 feet up had shifted. A single heavy box of detergent had tumbled down and smashed onto the concrete right where I had been sitting 10 seconds earlier. The liquid was pooling fast, shimmering in the dim light. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked up. The shrink wrap on that pallet hadn't just snapped, it looked like it had been sliced. I tried to tell Sal about it in the break room later. He was staring into his black coffee. When I mentioned Sector G and the phantom beeping, his hand spasmed, spilling hot coffee on the table. He didn't even flinch. He just muttered something about the old building settling and refused to make eye contact with me the rest of the night. A few nights later, I saw it. It was just a glimpse. I was cutting through a main corridor to get to the charging station. At the far end of a long, dark aisle, the red tail lights of a forklift drifted past. It was moving silently, no engine whine. But the most disturbing part was the cage. The metal safety cage where the driver sits was empty. I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. I wasn't crazy. I drove straight to the security office near the entrance. The guard on duty was a bored kid named Tyler who spent most of his shift watching Netflix on his phone. I begged him to pull up the camera feed for that corridor. He sighed, humoring me, and rewound the tape. We watched the grainy black and white screen. There was my lift crossing the hall. I pointed to the corner of the screen. There, right there. Tyler squinted. There's nothing there, man. On the monitor, the aisle was empty. The red lights I had seen with my own eyes weren't on the tape. Tyler laughed, telling me the graveyard shift was messing with my head. I almost believed him until I looked closer at the screen. The timestamp in the corner jumped. It skipped 4 seconds right when the other lift should have been visible. I should have quit right then, but like I said, I needed the money. Last Tuesday was the breaking point. It was 3 a.m., the deadest part of the night. I was back in Sector G, cornered in a dead-end aisle stacking heavy automotive parts. Without warning, the lights cut out. Not just flickering, the whole sector plunged into total, suffocating darkness. The only illumination came from the weak headlights of my lift, cutting a narrow cone through the blackness. Then the beeping started behind me. It wasn't the slow, rhythmic warning anymore. It was fast, urgent, and loud. It echoed off the metal racks, disorienting me. Twin beams of light suddenly cut through the dark at the open end of the aisle. It was another forklift, and it was charging straight at me. I slammed my machine into reverse, panic seizing my chest, but it stalled. The electric motor just died completely. I was a sitting duck. The other lift sped up. Its metal forks were lowered, scraping against the concrete floor like jagged tusks, sparking as they came. It was aiming right for my driver's cage. As it hit the pool of light from my headlamps, I saw it. The driver's cage wasn't empty this time. There was a shape. It looked human, but wrong. It was wearing a tattered, faded company vest from decades ago. The skin on its arms was gray and pulled tight like dried leather over bone. It raised its head as it closed the distance. It didn't have eyes, just dark, empty, endless sockets focused right on me, and below them a grin that was way too wide. I dove. I threw myself sideways out of the cage, hitting the concrete hard and rolling under the bottom shelf just as the impact happened. The crash was deafening. Metal screamed against metal. The rogue lift slammed mine with such force it drove it straight into the shelving unit. The racking groaned, then buckled. Tons of heavy auto parts rained down, crashing around me, burying me in noise and dust. I curled into a ball, shaking uncontrollably. Silence fell, except for the hiss of a broken hydraulic line. Then I heard the gear shift, beep, beep, beep. From under the shelf, I watched the tires of the other lift slowly reverse. It turned and drove away into the dark, the sound fading until it was gone. They fired me, of course. Management said I caused thousands of dollars in damage. They showed me the security footage. It showed me alone driving my forklift full speed into the racks. There was no other machine on the tape, just me looking terrified, crashing for no reason. Nobody believes me, not even Jason, but I did some digging at the library yesterday. I found an old microfilm article from 1998. A worker named Elias Vance was crushed to death in Sector G during a power outage. His forklift was found rammed into a support beam. They never found the other driver involved in the accident. I don't work in warehouses anymore. I got a job landscaping. It pays less, but it's outside in the daylight. But sometimes when I'm driving home late at night and a truck backs up near me, that beeping sound makes me flinch so hard I almost swerve off the road. And I swear, just for a second, I see those empty sockets staring at me from my own rearview mirror. Story 2, the shadow behind the pallet. You know that feeling when you're completely alone in a massive space, but the hair on the back of your neck stands up because your lizard brain knows you're being watched. That was my entire life working the graveyard shift at the regional distribution center. But last Thursday, I found out that feeling wasn't just paranoia. There are things in those endless aisles that supervisors and security cameras never see. My name is Chris, and I took the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. stocking job because the overnight differential paid enough to cover my tuition. It's a massive, soulless concrete box filled with towering metal racking that goes up 30 feet. At night, they dim the lights to save money, leaving huge sections of the warehouse in gloomy twilight. It's quiet, too. Just the endless hum of the refrigeration units and the occasional clank of metal settling in the cold. Usually, I worked with headphones on, drowning out the silence with podcasts. But that night, my phone died around 1 a.m. The silence immediately felt heavier, like a physical weight pressing against my eardrums. I was assigned to aisle 42, the dead stock area. It's where they keep stuff that rarely moves, heavy unpopular furniture, out-of-season decorations, stuff coated in a thick layer of dust. It's the furthest aisle from the break room and the manager's offices. I was scanning a pallet of discounted patio stones when I first saw it. It was just a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. Something dark darted into the narrow gap between two stacks of shrink-wrapped gazebos about 20 feet down the aisle. My heart did that double thump thing. I froze, holding my breath, just listening. The warehouse silence rushed back in. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded small and stupid in the vast space. Mike, quit screwing around. Mike was the shift lead, a guy known for dumb pranks, but he rarely came out this far. There was no answer, just the hum of the lights. I told myself it was a rat. We had some the size of small cats living in the walls. I tried to get back to work, but the vibe was gone. Every shadow seemed deeper. Every noise made me jump. About 20 minutes later, I was putting a label on a lower box when I heard a distinct sound. It came from right behind the pallet I was kneeling next to. Esirorich tap tap. It sounded like long fingernails dragging across cardboard, followed by a rhythmic tapping. I scrambled backward, nearly tripping over my own scanner gun. I shone my flashlight at the pallet. Nothing. It was just a solid wall of brown cardboard boxes wrapped in clear plastic. I wasn't going to ignore it this time. I grabbed the utility knife from my belt more for comfort than anything else and slowly walked around to the backside of the racking. There was a narrow service corridor there, maybe 2 feet wide, between the back of aisle 42 and the concrete outer wall of the building. It was pitch black in that corridor. My weak flashlight beam cut through the dust motes. "All right, whoever's back here, come out. I'm calling security," I lied. We didn't have night security. I took a few steps into the narrow gap. The air was colder here and it smelled strange, like old copper pennies and something sickly sweet like rotting fruit. Then I saw the shadow again. About 10 yards ahead, where the light barely reached, something peeled itself away from the concrete wall. It was tall, way too tall to be a person, and impossibly thin. It didn't look solid. It looked like a dense patch of darkness that had stood up. It didn't have features, but I felt its focus snap onto me. I couldn't move. Terror is a paralyzing agent. The thing seemed to vibrate, shifting its shape slightly. And then, from the darkness right next to my ear, a voice whispered. It didn't sound human. It sounded like dry leaves rustling together to form words. "He found us." I didn't wait to see what it was. Adrenaline finally kicked in and I bolted. I ran out of that service corridor, down aisle 42, and didn't stop until I burst into the brightly lit break room, chest heaving. Mike was there, scrolling on his phone. He looked up annoyed. "What's your problem, Chris? You look like you saw a ghost." I was gasping for air. I told him someone was back in aisle 42. I left out the shadow monster part because I knew how crazy it sounded. I just said I heard noises and saw a trespasser. Mike sighed, dramatic as always, and grabbed his flashlight. "Probably just a raccoon got in again, come on." I didn't want to go back, but I couldn't stay alone in the break room either. We walked back to aisle 42. The silence felt predatory now. Mike shone his light into the service corridor behind the racking. "There's nothing here, man, you're losing it." He walked down the narrow hallway, sweeping the light back and forth. I stayed at the entrance, terrified. Suddenly, Mike stopped. His light settled on something on the floor behind a stack of pallets. "Whoa," Mike said, his voice losing its sarcastic edge. "What is that?" He stepped closer, then immediately recoiled, gagging. "Oh God, oh my God, Chris, call 911. I crept forward, dread pooling in my stomach. Lying in the dust behind the pallet was a sleeping bag surrounded by old food wrappers, and sticking out of the top of the sleeping bag was a face. It was Dave, a guy from receiving who had stopped showing up for work 3 weeks ago. Everyone thought he just quit. Dave's eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. His skin was gray. He'd been dead for a while. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what was around his neck. Tightly woven around his throat was a thick rope made of twisted plastic shrink wrap, the same stuff we use on the pallets. The rope led upwards, disappearing into the darkness of the high rafters above us. Mike was fumbling for his phone, panic setting in. He hung himself back here. I looked up, following the makeshift rope into the gloom 30 feet above. That's when I saw movement up in the steel beams. 2 points of pale light, like eyes reflecting a flashlight, blinked down at us from the highest crossbeam. And then I heard that sound again. Tap tap. It came from directly above Dave's body. I grabbed Mike's arm and dragged him out of there. We ran for the front exit and called the cops from the parking lot. When the police arrived and searched aisle 42, they found Dave's body. But they didn't find any rope leading into the rafters, and they didn't find any trace of a tall shadow. I quit that night. I work landscaping now. I need to be outside under the open sky. Because sometimes when I have to go into a big box store and I walk past those high metal shelves, I catch a whiff of that coppery smell. And I know if I look into the gaps behind the inventory, something will be looking back.
Story 3, The Night Loading. If you are ever scrolling through a job board and see an ad for a high-paying graveyard shift at a remote shipping hub, do not apply. I do not care how much they offer me. No amount of money is worth the things I saw in the back of those trailers. I used to think people who told ghost stories were just looking for attention. But after my 3 months at a facility in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, I realized that the things we move across the country at night are not always what they seem. My name is Jason, and back in 2023, I was desperate for cash. I took a job at a place called Ridgeview Logistics. It was a massive gray concrete slab of a building tucked away in a valley, miles from the nearest gas station. My shift was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The pay was nearly double the daytime rate, which should have been my first red flag. My supervisor was a guy named Bill who looked like he had not slept since the 90s. He mostly stayed in his glass-walled office, nursing a thermos of black coffee and staring at a bank of monitors that always seemed to show static. The work was simple. I had to load trailers using a pallet jack. Most of the stuff was standard retail gear, clothing, electronics, home goods. But about 3 weeks in, the manifest started getting weird. I would get a trailer that was not on the schedule, usually arriving at exactly 3 a.m. The trucks were always unmarked. No company logo, no dot number, just flat black paint that seemed to swallow the light from the dock lamps. One Tuesday, a black truck backed into Bay 14. I waited for the driver to hop out and hand me the paperwork, but nobody ever came around. I checked the cab and it was empty. Not just unoccupied, but empty like it had been gutted. No seats, no steering wheel, just a hollow metal shell. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I figured it was some new automated tech they were testing. I hit the button to open the dock door, and the air that hit me from inside the trailer was freezing. It had to be below zero in there, even though it was a humid July night. I started loading the first pallet. As I pushed the jack into the dark interior, my headlamps flickered. I heard a sound from the very back of the trailer. It was a rhythmic, wet-slapping noise, like someone was hitting a piece of raw meat against a tile floor. I stopped and listened. The noise stopped instantly. I told myself it was just the trailer settling on its suspension. I pushed the second pallet in, and that is when I saw the crates. There were already 3 wooden crates in the nose of the trailer. They were not on my manifest. They were wrapped in heavy chains and had small holes drilled into the sides. A thick, dark fluid was seeping from the bottom of the middle crate, pooling on the metal floor. It did not smell like oil or chemicals. It smelled like a butcher shop at the end of a long day. I reached out to touch the crate, and something inside slammed against the wood so hard the entire trailer rocked. I fell backward, my heart nearly bursting out of my chest. I ran to Bill's office. I was sweating and shaking. I told him there was something alive in the trailer in Bay 14 and that it was leaking blood. Bill did not even look up from his static-filled monitors. He just told me to finish the load and stay out of the nose of the truck. He said the less I knew, the longer I would keep my job. I realized then that Bill was not tired because of the hours. He was terrified. I went back planning to just finish and quit the next morning, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. I grabbed my utility knife and walked to those crates. I peered through one of the drilled holes. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness inside. I expected to see an animal, maybe a bear or some exotic creature being smuggled. Instead, I saw a human eye. It was huge, pale, and it did not have a pupil. It was just staring back at me, blinking slowly. Below the eye, I could see a row of teeth that were jagged and thin, like needles. The thing started to whisper. It was not a language I understood, but the sound felt like it was vibrating inside my teeth. I backed away, but the dock plate suddenly hissed and retracted. The heavy rolling door of the warehouse slammed shut, locking me inside the trailer with those crates. The truck's engine roared to life, even though I knew the cab was empty. I screamed and pounded on the walls, but the truck began to move. I was trapped. The slapping noise started again, louder this time. The chains on the crates began to rattle and slide off. Whatever was in there was coming out. I fumbled for my phone, but there was no signal. I was alone in a moving metal tomb with something that was not supposed to exist. In a moment of pure panic, I remembered the emergency release handle on the inside of the trailer door. I lunged for it just as the middle crate shattered. A long, gray, multi-jointed limb reached out of the wreckage. It looked like a human arm, but it had too many elbows. I pulled the release and the door swung open. The wind whipped in as the truck sped down the dark back roads. I did not think. I just jumped. I tumbled down a steep embankment, thorns tearing at my skin. I watched the black truck disappear into the fog. It did not have tail lights. It just vanished. I hiked for 3 hours until I found a farmhouse. The cops went to Ridgeview Logistics the next day, but the facility was locked up. They told me the company had gone bankrupt 6 months ago and the building was supposed to be empty. I moved to a different state after that. I do not work nights anymore, but sometimes when I am lying in bed, I hear the distinct hiss of air brakes outside my window, and I know that somewhere out there, the night loading is still happening. I just hope they never run out of crates.